Hello. Great to be on stage in this amazing auditorium. And, well, most of you might know the saying, the proof of the pudding is in its eating. Huh? There is this time to play around in the kitchen and experiment and try out stuff, but there is the time to serve and to deliver. I think that service design now has achieved a degree of maturity where we are designing to deliver. We have to do stuff that can be implemented and where we can measure the success of what we have been done in order to learn from it and in order, of course, to continuously promote service design as a means for impact, as a means to really make a change to systems. So, is there an issue about delivery in service design? Do we have any problems around implementation? I would say yes and no. I would say no when I walk through the shortlisted Service Design Award projects and I look at the amazing stuff that people are doing out there, and all of that has been implemented and has been measured. I would say, no, we don't have an issue. If I look at all these great cases that are being presented here, just now what Chioban has shown us about the family-friendly shopping experience, all that has been implemented and measured. So it seems that there is a lot of great stuff out there. You can find it in the SDN case study database. So why are we talking about it? Because, on the other hand, we do have an issue around implementation. Not only that many of the concepts that are being developed are still dying in desk drawers in the end, also because stuff that is being implemented partially is not being measured and we don't really know what happened to it. But it is also an issue because there's an attitude thing. A former student of mine, Lena Hammes, who has then worked with Fjord, she did her thesis about implementation and she did interviews with service designers asking them how they define their role in the different phases of the service design project. And indeed, it was only about 50% that saw a trace of responsibility in the implementation phase. And that is an issue. If service designers do not feel responsibility for implementation, then they will not deliver. The other thing is, and that is a research that has been done by Ricardo Martinez about 2 years ago. He found in an analysis of all available service design tools that only 4% of the methods and tools are focusing on implementation. There is a rich body of knowledge and tools and methods that are for exploration and creation, prototyping, even maybe a bit of testing. But then when it comes to the end of the line, there is nothing specifically that service design is contributing. So I would say we do have an issue. And that was the point when Tina had approached me and she was really interested in doing her PhD thesis in that domain. So we teamed up and looked at the question, what are success factors for implementation?
So when I got into service design 8 years ago, I really felt a great need to understand, like, how do you actually deliver? How do you deal with all the organizational issues and all the stakeholders involved? And coming from a background where I had my own agency, design agency, I always remember potential new clients asking, like, so, what have you done that was successful? What have you achieved? And I think that is the question where you should have an answer to, and that's why I think implementation is really important for your own success, for your personal success, but also for the agencies or for the companies you work for. And that was the motivation behind this study, to really figure out, can we find success factors? Can we identify them? And that would really help service designers and companies working with the service design approach to be more successful or to achieve implementation much easier. And we also wanted to explore our assumptions that service designers need to learn new skills and more methods. Okay, and so what did we do? We had the support of 50 experts out of the service design industry. We had very experienced service designers from companies like LiveWork or Helon or IDEO. But we also had systemic consultants, which was very interesting, and business consultants, and also people out of the industry that have experienced service design for quite a while. So, have you ever been overwhelmed by the complexity of a service design project? Probably Probably yes, and probably you're not alone. So I think there's a broad agreement that service design is a really, really complex issue. So every touch point can be connected to a multitude of systems. And I think the really tricky bit is like you can't really see the system behind. So you change one touch point and there are like many, many effects through the whole organization, through the whole system. And I think that was the idea to really look into, or to use, to talk to other people who have been dealing with complexity for quite a while. So we thought, you know, why don't we learn from systems thinker? Because, I mean, they are really, you know, professionals, experts in dealing with complexity. So the guy on the left side, Niklas Luhmann, he's the founder of a social systems theory. He gave us a really, really good foundation because his explanations how communication works, how complex systems react with each other was really amazing to see how this kind of gave a lot of answers to barriers that we focus if we want to do implementation. And also, Fredrik Fester, he was actually applying systems thinking, developing big scenarios, and he has developed a really great method called cross-impact analysis, or you can call it paper computer, and there you can evaluate a project that you've done, and you can see, you know, what were the factors that were leading to the success of the project, and you can see if you change one, how it affects all the others. And I think that's a really interesting kind of exercise to see how how everything is really connected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what are the key learnings? Yes, you can be lucky that we decided not to lead you through the 230 pages document of the PhD. So we actually thought we distill six learnings that we think would be really helpful for you to understand implementation much better.
Yeah, so design is all about making complexity handleable, and that's what we try to do. 6 key learnings that we took out of the whole research, and we are going to lead you through these 6, and hopefully that will contribute to a better understanding on how to drive implementation in your projects. So the first one is set clear objectives. Sounds very basic, is very basic. But we can just underline that the successful projects that we saw in this research were based on a clear understanding of what the projects were aiming at. The people that worked on these projects tended to use this Toshiba 5W approach, asking 5 times why. Why do you want to achieve that? Why do you want to get there? Why do you want to change that? So really make sure that there's a mutual understanding between the consultant, the service design agency, and the client about what's the aim, where are you going? Another approach that we encountered throughout the study was that systemic questioning is something that helps a lot within these complex systems to get to the real why and to the real objective. So systemic questions, for example, how would you know that we have successfully achieved what you want to achieve? What would be the indicators that would show you that something has changed for the better? So there's a whole body of systemic questions, and applying those to the definition of objectives is definitely helpful to get a clear understanding where do you want to go. And only if that is pinned down and written down and documented, you can decide whether you have really implemented anything in the end that you are aiming at and whether you are successful. There is, of course, the thing, when we start a service design project, we do not yet know exactly where we will be going. So it's a rough direction. It's an area of exploration that we are entering. So the definition of objectives is most certainly an iterative project, and you have to define milestones throughout the project where you will revisit these objectives and try to align them and make sure that they are still up to date. But even if we are creative and if we are moving through a messy project and if we are exploring the yet unknown, objectives are a tool that helps to guide us into the direction of a potential implementation. One more little thing, there is different types of objectives. There's outcome-oriented objectives where you can say, we want to improve the experience for parents shopping in a supermarket. That would be a real result-oriented objective where you can have clear measures in the end whether you succeeded. But you can also have process-oriented objectives. We want to enhance the ability of our staff to explore the needs of our users. And that you can then translate into measurables. That is also something that you could regard as an implementation if you have succeeded on a project-oriented objective.
Okay, learning number 2. I remember a manager from E.ON telling me, we still have this rupture between, concept and implementation. And where does this rupture come from? I think there might be many reasons, but it became through the research very obvious that you cannot start thinking about implementation, once the concept is great, the prototypes are great. You really have to think about implementation way before, and there is a researcher from the University of Linköping, I always pronounce it wrong, Linköping, and he said, implementation is not an add-on. It's not something, you start thinking at the end. And there is this great quote from a director of a global service design agency, and he said, if you don't think about implementation before, it's like putting a Rolls-Royce into Uganda. So I think that's a really main learning. You have to prepare way before, so you have to set a lot of conditions before you actually go and design something. That's the model we developed in the study. So it shows you 4 phases, and learning from systemic consultants, they put a big emphasis on on the preparation of the whole process. So we added a first phase called key prerequisites, where you kind of lay the foundation for everything that comes later. I'm sure you discover, terms it's like discovery, define, and deliver. So this is like an implementation process, and it's not a linear one, as I think it's also iterative. There are many, many circles.
Mm-hmm. So the prerequisites are often referred to as the contract phase, where you lay the foundations for the project. That is, of course, connected to the clear objectives that I mentioned earlier, but it is also connected to 6 hygiene factors that were identified in the study. So these are the most important things that need to be dealt with in this prerequisite phase, in the contracting phase. First of all, quite naturally, compliance. Do you have the right supporters within the organization? Do you have the right C-level sponsoring in order to have people that guide you through the politics and through the jungle that you might encounter in the organization? So this is something to clarify with the client really early. Whom do we need if we want to implement a specific concept, or if we want to make a specific change happen? You have to contract about the interdivisional staff involvement. We do talk about interdisciplinarity, but very often throughout the process of a project, we find, well, the other departments don't have time, they have not allocated any people to the project, it's very hard to get anybody who contributes consistently. And this, of course, might happen if you have not put it on the agenda of the contracting phase. So talk about the question, how many people with how many time allocation will be available for the project, from which departments? The personal capacity in your client's department. Yes, it's a co-creative process, and we know that we have to participate in the exploration. That's the saying, but then when it comes to doing it, it's an extra burden on many of the staff. And we cannot be responsible for putting overhours and extra burden into an organization instead of creating clarity from the very beginning that we will need the support of the organization, of the team, and kind of at least create a specification on how much support will that be. Implementation management. Who is in charge of the question of implementation? Not in the end, but throughout the process. So in the best case, you define in the phase 1, in the prerequisite phase, somebody who has this eye on implementation, which does not mean that we want to have mediocre service design projects that jump very short. No, this project can be big, it can be about big thinking, it can be far beyond the given. And still, there needs to be this coaching or this sparring about, what do we have to do in order to make it more probable that this can be implemented at a specific point. So implementation management is what we call it, discuss it in the prerequisite phase, make sure that it's part of the contracting, who has the responsibility to monitor the implementation. Implementation maturity. That is a double-sided sword. For the one hand side, it's the question, is the organization capable of implementing what they are aiming at? Or are the objectives and the maturity that the organization has two totally different pairs of shoes? So try to figure out, is the objectives of change or innovation that they are aiming at and what they have as a capacity somehow aligned. Implementation maturity has to do with the budget. It has to do with the culture of the organization. It has to do with the heartbeat, if you remember. On the other hand of this two-sided sword, we have the implementation maturity of the service design agency. Do you have, as an agency, the capacities and capabilities to guide a system through implementation? Or would you need external capacities in order to really, be set up to help not only the concept development, but also the organizational change, the training of staff, the communication within the system? Is it something that you can really carry, or do you need support? And last but not least, a really important hygiene factor for the contracting phase is the temporary organization.
So have you ever moved your team inside the organization? We've learned from the research that this happens quite often. So there was one example of a project that almost failed, where the client, there was an airline, reported that the external service designers, they felt quite uncomfortable working with the internal team, so they prefer to go into their studio and do their thing, be undisturbed, something which is quite nice. But in this case, the concepts they came back with were very far from the reality of the airline's day-to-day activities. So the airline learned to really integrate their internal staff much earlier, but also to make sure it's a really, really close collaboration. And so service design experts, they were talking a lot about the safe space. So you need to create a safe space so new ideas can develop. And the systemic consultants, they call it temporary organization, where that's like the space where external and internal people meet. And so what does it mean? How does it work to have a temporary project organization? It's like you set up a temporary team. You can define work rules. You define different roles that you need during the process. You can have your own culture, because usually what happens is that external people and internal people, they don't have the same speed of working. So this is a space where people can align, where you can develop, a work culture, but also that employees of your client's organization, they can adapt to the human-centered approach to the mindset much better. And what also helps, this space helps that you protect new ideas and they don't get kind of rejected right away because they are new, and usually new things are quite difficult for large organizations. That's another very crucial point. It's from a BMW manager. He said, it's not only a mindset mismatch, it's also a language challenge, which is, it's so trivial, but usually, a lot of times it happens. People come together, they come from different backgrounds, different mindsets, and they don't really understand each other. So that's very important, that you have a common understanding. You define terms, you define everything that will happen working together. Also, what was obvious became obvious. It's important that the employees inside the client organization, that they stay the idea owner, that you, not being an external designer, that you own the ideas. So make sure this stays inside. But what's the role, also an important role of an external designer, is to keep the outside, the outside perspective. Always make sure you're the advocate of everything that's going on outside. There can be many roles within such a temporary organization. I think you have journey managers, you have facilitators. You need to switch from process to expert consultants. You need researchers. There's a big cloud of roles you need. So I wanted to share this. That's, I think, one of my favorite quotes. That's from Heinz von Förster. He was the guy who invented the term cybernetics. Sounds quite, it's a very difficult term. But what does it mean? It means whatever you do, if you come and enter you work with a client, with the staff, with the employees. It means everything you do has an effect, you know. Every workshop, every interview can have an effect on the person, but also on the whole system. And I think it's also the thing, you don't see the, you know, the effect right away. It might come at a much later point, and it might lead to resistance. So that's learning number 5. So have you ever experienced resistance? Okay, so don't worry, you're not alone, again. So I think there was a nice quote from a German CEO of a service design agency. He said, like, we're learning by resistance. So I think service designers experience a lot of different forms of resistance. And I think the first very easy example is if you go out, you do all this user research, and you come back with all the mistakes you found, you know, all this negativity, and you're presented, you're very proud about, you know, all these pain points you found. But for the organization, this is like a really hard thing, because you confront them with their external image, and that's not easy to kind of to integrate. And so this might already lead to resistance. But resistance, actually, it's a very natural reaction by a system, because imagine, like, every organization would change, you know, they have a new buzzword, a new method coming up. Okay, let's do it, you know, new ideas, we change everything. So every day they would change, you know. So it's very important that you actually, that a system has some, you know, they react to it because they want to stay stable. So I think it's also important to feel, I mean, to respect. If you feel resistance, I think it's actually a good thing. You just have to, you have to tackle it. You have to work with it. So how could you support your client, you know, in accepting new ideas? There's systemic consultants, they call it humans are purpose-driven. So I think it's very important if you come, you know, you come with new ideas, you have all these new things, you know, everything has to change, then you have to make people understand the meaning behind that, the purpose. So why should they do it? You know, to make really sure they buy into it, they get exciting, and they really want to, so that you can create this, you know, this energy that is, you know, it goes through the whole organization, or through the, you know, or through the department, or wherever you want to change something. And I think that's a very nice thing, that service designers have such great tools. You know, you have all these, you can do prototyping, you have so many tools to really make people understand what you know, how the new, the unfamiliar could look like. And I think that's a very powerful tool that we have, and that I think we should always, you know, whenever we feel resistance, maybe we should, you know, be better in explaining, and you know, and really explaining people, you know, why should we do that? And I think then people will, you know, will slowly reduce their distrust in the human-centered design process, and are much more able to embrace it. So that's the last learning that we have. So what is important for decision makers? I mean, there are a lot of, before there was like I think half of the here are people from organizations. So I think, you know, what is important for decision makers who actually have the, you know, have the task to then say, like, these are the concepts we do, and these are all the concepts that we don't want to do. So like another director of I think it was a Dutch service design agency, he said, like, you know, clients, they ask us really to further support them in their process. But so, like, we don't really have the tools to do that yet at the moment. And we have one problem, we don't really speak proper management language. And I think that's the field, you know, where you really where you can really learn from business consultants, like, how do you support executives in this whole process of making the decision? And how do you help them to measure, you know, to measure what the impact actually would be of your concept? And I think that's, like, we saw it in the presentation just before, you know, like the measurement of concepts. So I think it's one thing, you know, on the left, you see the user benefit. You know, it's easy, I think, for service designers to say, like, that's the benefit for the user. And I think it's also quite obvious that you say, like, what is the, you know, how does the new concept pay into business target? But I think a very important thing is the organizational kind of consequence. So what does it mean for the organization? You know, can the organization be ready to actually deliver or to execute this new concept? So what is the transformation movement? You know, kind of saying, how many new people would you need? How many people would you need to train? I mean, I mean, I was working with like a big airline, and there you talk about 20,000 people that you have to train, you know? So I think it is quite important to think the concepts more through. So really kind of try to speak, try to figure out and do business research and figure out what are the important criteria in that company, what are the KPIs, where do we, you know, what is important, and also for the sponsors of the project. I mean, you always have sponsors on C-level, so what is their personal motivation, and how would the new concept affect their role, their future in the company? So I think to really look into that one is also quite crucial. And that was a quote from a systemic consultant, and she said she was also working for a big airline project, and he said, like, and there is something, if you have this concept, and all of a sudden the staff has to do 10 more things, and it gets more complex. It's like compensation is a really powerful tool. So you can, I think it's like a really important point that you support the decision makers in really establishing a good compensation concept. So you cannot only take from people, you also have to give something back. Otherwise, they will just do it for a short time, but they will not do it in a really sustainable way. And I think a half-implemented project is also like a really horrible thing. Some of the staff doing it, the others not doing it.
Great.
I think there was one also very nice learning. I think that's also quite a good learning. There was this thing that a lot of agencies, they said, like, it takes us around five years to work on really big end-to-end projects. Usually we start with one touch point, then maybe a year later we have another touch point, whatever. So it slowly grows. And that also means, like, the client can build up trust, and, step by step, you can tackle the really big, nice challenges.
Yeah, so that was the condensed 24 success factors for implementation. If you're interested in more details around that, Tina and I have published an article in Touchpoint, not the newest one that you got for free, but the one before that. So there you will also find in more detail the cure model that has been developed in this study. And yeah, so if you are interested, enjoy or contact us. But this is, what was found in looking at successful projects as they are out there today. The open question remains, what is the outlook? What has to happen in the future in order to make service design even more powerful through implementation? And we think that there is a couple of issues that need to be tackled. One, as I said earlier, the understanding of the designer, of the service designer. So if you are a client, ask your agency, do you feel that implementation is your responsibility? And if you are a designer, if you are a service designer, ask yourself at the beginning of a project, where do I see my responsibility? Does it go through from end to the implementation phase, or am I the expert for exploration or the expert for ideation? And if you are, be open about it. Don't start a project without having clarity about your role, and that means self-reflection. The second thing that we found really important is that expertise has to grow. The challenges that service design agencies are facing today are real-world challenges often of a high complexity. It's not about polishing up a little journey or creating a new touch point. It's often really complex. Live Work Oslo has merged with PwC very lately, and we had a very intense conversation about that. And they said, well, there are several reasons, but one reason is that through this merge, we have access to experts. We can go into the organization. We have legal advice. We have people that are experts on logistics. We have experts in the company that are finance experts. And if we can draw from this organization, we are much more capable of serving our clients in a service design project through this complexity. So that's what they see. I'm ambivalent about these mergers. I think it's good that there is knowledge within the consultancies, but I also hope that there will be strong service design agencies out there that survive alone. But it means that we have to develop a more rich body of knowledge through education, or we have to advise the service designers to draw more experts from the outside field, to collaborate more strongly and not think design is the magic weapon that can do it all. And last but not least, I think that the service design discipline as a whole has to do research in the development of design-specific tools for implementation. So what is our specific design contribution to make the change happen? And how can we formulate that in a more explicit way? I know that implicitly we are powering change, but what are the explicit things that we can use and systematically apply in order to drive implementation? So those are maybe a couple of things that we see for the future. I do hope that this was inspirational. I would like to thank Tina for the great collaboration. It was great to have her as a PhD student, and it was great to share these insights with you. Thanks a lot.